I wish good morning, good day to everybody here at Amaravati and those gathered around the country and around the world who are tuning in for this. Today is June the 17th, and this is the day when we celebrate Luang Chah's birthday. He was born in 1918, so 102 years ago, and so at the main monastery in Thailand, Wat Pah Pong, and all of our branch monasteries around the world. This is a day to recollect Luang Chah and his teachings, and to cultivate the sense of gratitude, appreciation for what we have received from him over the years, and how he has set an example and a standard of practice that are so beneficial for us, even though he passed away many years ago now, in 1992. Still his legacy carries on and is a very powerful informing presence in our lives. So this morning I'll read some passages from his Dhamma talks, and these are offered for people's reflection and to take to heart and to use today, to listen to these words, to take them in, to let them be reflected upon, contemplated, and to see how they guide our understanding, our view, our relationship to our life and the world in a skillful way. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Also being very aware that we have this pandemic experience happening in the world at this time, so our monastery gates are still closed, so there's physically a small number of people here at Amaravati today, but the hope is that within a few weeks' time we might be able to open the place up a little bit, but for now we're having a continued lockdown. So there's about 65 people living here on site. So some of us are gathered here in the temple, others are joining in with us from around the monastery. This first Dhamma teaching is called Dhamma Nature, and this is from the collected teachings of Venerable Ajahn Chah. This was given at Wat Pah Chah sometime shortly after one of the senior monks had disrobed, and it was after Luang Por Sumedho had already moved to England. Ajahn Pabakaro was the new abbot at Wat Pah Chah, and one of his close associates and companions, the monk of Varapanyo, Bhikkhu Varapanyo, had disrobed, and so that then after a long negotiation period where he was trying to persuade Luang Por Chah to let him leave. So Luang Por Chah had come over and was giving this teaching to the community of Westerners shortly after Varapanyo had left the robes. Sometimes, when a fruit tree is in bloom, a breeze stirs and scatters blossoms on the ground. Some buds remain and grow into small green fruit. A wind blows, and some of them too fall. Still others may become fruit or nearly ripe, some even fully ripe before they fall. So it is with people. Like flowers and fruit in the wind, they too fall in different stages of life. Some people die while still in the womb, others within only a few days after birth. Some people live for a few years and then die, never reaching maturity. Men and women die in their youth, still others reach a ripe old age before they die. When reflecting upon people, consider the nature of fruit in the wind. Both are very uncertain. This uncertain nature of things can also be seen in the monastic life. Some people come to the monastery intending to ordain, but change their minds and leave, some with their heads already shaved, Others are already novices, then they decide to leave. Some ordain for only one rains retreat, then disrobe, just like fruit in the wind, all very uncertain. Our minds are also similar. A mental impression arises, draws and pulls at the mind, and then the mind falls, just like the fruit. The Buddha understood this uncertain nature of things. He observed the phenomenon of fruit in the wind and reflected upon the monks and novices who were his disciples. He found that they too were essentially of the same nature, uncertain. How could it be otherwise? This is just the way of all things. Thus, for one who is practicing with awareness, it isn't necessary to have someone to advise and teach all that much, to be able to see and to understand. An example is the case of the Buddha, who, in a previous life, was King Mahajanaka. He didn't need to study very much. All he had to do was observe a mango tree. One day, while visiting a park with his retinue of ministers, from atop his elephant, he spied some mango trees heavily laden with ripe fruit. Not being able to stop at that time, he determined in his mind to return later to partake of some. Little did he know, however, that his ministers, coming along behind, would greedily gather them all up, and that they would use poles to knock them down, beating and breaking the branches, tearing and scattering the leaves. Returning in the evening to the mango grove, the king, already imagining in his mind the delicious taste of the mangoes, suddenly discovered that they were all gone, completely finished. Not only that, but the branches and leaves had been thoroughly thrashed and scattered. The king, quite disappointed and upset, then noticed another mango tree nearby with its leaves and branches still intact. He wondered why. He then realized it was because the tree had no fruit. If a tree has no fruit, nobody disturbs it, and so its leaves and branches are not damaged. This lesson kept him absorbed in thought all the way back to the palace. It's unpleasant, troublesome, and difficult to be a king. It requires constant concern for all his subjects. What if there are attempts to attack, plunder, and seize parts of the kingdom? He couldn't rest peacefully. Even in his sleep, he was disturbed by dreams. He saw in his mind once again the mango tree without fruit and its undamaged leaves and branches. If we become similar to that mango tree, he thought, our leaves, and branches too, would not be damaged. In his chamber he sat and meditated. Finally, he decided to ordain as a monk, having been inspired by this lesson of the mango tree. He compared himself to that mango tree and concluded that if one didn't become involved in the ways of the world, one would be truly independent, free from worries and difficulties. The mind would be untroubled. Reflecting thus, he ordained. From then on, wherever he went, when asked who his teacher was, he would answer, a mango tree. He didn't need to receive much teaching. A mango tree was the cause of his awakening to the Opanayiko Dhamma, the teaching leading inwards. And with this awakening, he became a monk, one who has few concerns, is content with little, and who delights in solitude. His royal status given up, his mind was finally at peace. In this story, the Buddha was a bodhisattva who developed his practice in this way continuously. Like the Buddha as King Mahajanaka, we too should look around us and be observant, because everything in the world is ready to teach us. With even a little intuitive wisdom, we will be able to see clearly through the ways of the world. We'll come to understand that everything in the world is a teacher. Trees and vines, for example, can all reveal the true nature of reality. With wisdom, there's no need to question anyone, no need to study. We can learn from nature enough to be enlightened, as in the story of King Mahajanaka. Because everything follows the way of truth. It does not diverge from the truth. Associated with wisdom are self-composure and restraint, which, in turn, can lead to further insight into the ways of nature. In this way, we'll come to know the ultimate truth of everything being anicca, dukkha, anatta. Take trees, for example. All trees upon the earth are equal. They are one when seen through the reality of anicca, dukkha, anatta. First, they come into being, then grow and mature, constantly changing, until they finally die, as every tree must. In the same way, people and animals are born, grow, and change during their lifetimes until they eventually die. The multitudinous changes which occur during this transition from birth to death show the way of Dhamma. That is to say, all things are impermanent, having decay and dissolution as their natural condition. If we have awareness and understanding, if we study with wisdom and mindfulness, we will see Dhamma as reality. Thus we will see people as constantly being born, changing, and finally passing away. Everyone is subject to the cycle of birth and death, and because of this, everyone in this universe is as one being. Thus, seeing one person clearly and distinctly is the same as seeing every person in the world. In the same way, everything is Dhamma. Not only the things we see with our physical eye, but also the things we see in our minds. A thought arises, then changes and passes away. It is nama Dhamma, simply a mental impression that arises and passes away. This is the real nature of the mind. Altogether, this is the noble truth of Dhamma. If one doesn't look and observe in this way, one doesn't really see. If one does see, one will have the wisdom to listen to the Dhamma as proclaimed by the Buddha. Where is the Buddha? The Buddha is in the Dhamma. Where is the Dhamma? The Dhamma is in the Buddha. Right here, now, where is the Sangha? The Sangha is in the Dhamma. The Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha exist in our minds, but we have to see it clearly. Some people just pick this up casually saying, oh, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, they exist in my mind. Yet their own practice is not suitable or appropriate. It's thus not befitting that the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha should be found in their minds, namely because the mind must first be that mind which knows the Dhamma. Bringing everything back to this point of Dhamma, we'll come to know that the truth does exist in the world, and thus it is possible for us to practice and realize it. For instance, nama Dhamma, feelings, thoughts, imagination, etc., are all uncertain. When anger arises, it grows and changes, finally disappears. Happiness too arises, grows and changes, and finally disappears. They are empty. They're not anything. This is always the way of all things, both mentally and materially. Internally, there are this body and mind. Externally, there are trees, vines, and all manner of things which display this universal law of uncertainty. Whether a tree, a mountain, or an animal, it's all Dhamma. Everything is Dhamma. Where is this Dhamma? Speaking simply, that which is not Dhamma doesn't exist. Dhamma is nature. This is called the Satya Dhamma, the true Dhamma. If one sees nature, one sees Dhamma. If one sees Dhamma, one sees nature. Seeing nature, one knows the Dhamma. And so, what is the use of a lot of study when the ultimate reality of life, in its every moment, in its every act, is just an endless cycle of births and deaths? If we are mindful and clearly aware when in all postures, sitting, standing, walking, lying, then self-knowledge is waiting to be born. That is, knowing the truth of Dhamma already in existence, right here and now. At present, the Buddha, the real Buddha, is still living, for he is the Dhamma itself, the Satya Dhamma. And Satya Dhamma, that which enables one to become Buddha, still exists. It hasn't fled anywhere. It gives rise to two Buddhas, one in body and the other in mind. The real Dhamma, the Buddha told Ananda, can only be realized through practice. Whoever sees the Buddha sees the Dhamma. And how is this? Previously, no Buddha existed. It was only when Siddhartha Gautama realized the Dhamma that he became the Buddha. If we explain it in this way, then he is the same as us. If we realize the Dhamma, then we will likewise be the Buddha. This is called the Buddha in mind, or Nama Dhamma. We must be mindful of everything we do, for we become the inheritors of our own good or evil actions. In doing good, we reap good. In doing evil, we reap evil. All you have to do is look into your everyday lives to know that this is so. Siddhartha Gautama was enlightened to the realization of this truth, and this gave rise to the appearance of a Buddha in the world. Likewise, if each and every person practices to attain this truth, then they too will change to be Buddha. Thus, the Buddha still exists. Some people are very happy saying, "Oh, if the Buddha still exists, then I can practice the Dhamma." That's how you should see it. The Dhamma that the Buddha realized is the Dhamma which exists permanently in the world. It can be compared to groundwater, which permanently exists in the ground. When a person wishes to dig a well, they must dig down deep enough to reach the groundwater. The groundwater is already there. He doesn't create the water, he just discovers it. Similarly, the Buddha didn't invent the Dhamma. He didn't decree the Dhamma. He merely revealed what was already there. Through contemplation, the Buddha saw the Dhamma. Therefore it's said that the Buddha was enlightened, for enlightenment is knowing the Dhamma. The Dhamma is the truth of this world. Seeing this, Siddhartha Gautama is called the Buddha. The Dhamma is that which allows other people to become a Buddha, one who knows the Dhamma. If beings have good conduct and are loyal to the Buddha Dhamma, then those beings will never be short of virtue and goodness. With understanding, we will see that we're really not far from the Buddha, but sitting face to face with him. When we understand the Dhamma, then at that moment we will see the Buddha. If one really practices, one will hear the Buddha Dhamma, whether sitting at the root of a tree, lying down, or in whatever posture. This is not something to merely think about. It arises from the pure mind. Just remembering these words is not enough, because this depends upon seeing the Dhamma itself, nothing other than this. Thus we must be determined to practice to be able to see this, and then our practice will really be complete. Wherever we sit, stand, walk, or lie down, we will hear the Buddha's Dhamma. In order to practice his teaching, the Buddha taught us to live in a quiet place so that we can learn to collect and restrain the senses of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. This is the foundation for our practice, since these are the only places where all things arise. Thus we collect and restrain these 6 senses in order to know the conditions that arise there. All good and evil arise through these 6 senses. They are the predominant faculties in the body. The eye is predominant in seeing, the ear in hearing, the nose in smelling, the tongue in tasting, the body in contacting hot and cold, hard and soft, and the mind in the arising of mental impressions. All that remains for us to do is to build our practice around these points. The practice is easy because all that is necessary has already been set down by the Buddha. This is comparable to the Buddha planting an orchard and inviting us to partake of its fruit. We ourselves do not need to plant one. Whether concerning morality, meditation, or wisdom, there's no need to create, decree, or speculate, because all that we need to do is to follow things which already exist in the Buddha's teaching. Therefore, we are beings who have much merit and good fortune in having heard the teachings of the Buddha. The orchard already exists. The fruit is already ripe. Everything is already complete and perfect. All that is lacking is someone to partake of the fruit, someone with faith enough to practice. We should consider that our merit and good fortune are very valuable. All we need to do is to look around to see how much other creatures are possessed of ill fortune. Take dogs or pigs, snakes and other creatures, for instance. They have no chance to study Dhamma, no chance to know Dhamma, no chance to practice Dhamma. These beings possessed of ill fortune are receiving karmic retribution. When one has no chance to study, to know, to practice Dhamma, then one has no chance to be free from suffering. As human beings, we should not allow ourselves to become victims of ill fortune, deprived of proper manners and discipline. Don't become a victim of ill fortune. That is to say, one without hope of attaining the path of freedom, to Nibbana, one without hope of developing virtue. Do not think that we're already without hope. By thinking in that way, we've become possessed of ill fortune, the same as other creatures. We are beings who have come within the sphere of influence of the Buddha. We human beings are already of sufficient merit and resources. If we correct and develop our understanding, opinions and knowledge in the present, it'll lead us to behave and practice in such a way as to see and know Dhamma in this present life as human beings. We are beings that should be enlightened to the Dhamma, and thus different from other creatures. The Buddha taught that at this present moment, the Dhamma exists here in front of us. The Buddha sits facing us right here and now. At what other time or place are you going to look? If we don't think rightly, if we don't practice rightly, we'll fall back to being animals or creatures in hell or hungry ghosts or demons. How is this? Just look into your mind. When anger arises, what is it? There it is. Just look. When delusion arises, what is it? That's it, right there. When greed arises, what is it? Look at it, right there. By not recognizing and clearly understanding these mental states, the mind changes from being that of a human being. All conditions are in the state of becoming. Becoming gives rise to birth or existence as determined by the present conditions. Thus we become and exist as our minds condition us. And then I'll read some selections from this other Dhamma talk, and this one is entitled Not Sure, or Mainer, in the Thai language. Again, it starts off with talking about a Western monk, for obvious reasons. I've made some particular choices for the readings today. There was once a Western monk, a student of mine. Whenever he saw Thai monks and novices disrobing, he'd say, "Oh, what a shame. Why do they do that? Why do so many of the Thai monks and novices disrobe?" He was shocked. He would get saddened at the disrobing of the Thai monks and novices because he had only just come into contact with Buddhism. He was inspired. He was resolute. Going forth as a monk was the only thing to do. He thought he'd never disrobe. Whoever disrobed was a fool. He'd see the Thais taking on the robes at the beginning of the rains retreat as monks and novices, and then disrobing at the end of it. He would say, "Oh, how sad. I feel so sorry for those Thai monks and novices. How could they do such a thing?" Well, as time went by, some of the Western monks began to disrobe, so he came to see it as something not so important after all. At first, when he just begun to practice, he was excited about it. He thought that it was a really important thing to do, to become a monk. He thought it would be easy. He'd see people come to become monks for only one rains retreat and get upset. Later on, he reached a stage which we call bored. Bored with the holy life. He let go of the practice and eventually disrobed. Why are you disrobing? Before, when you saw the Thai monks disrobing, you'd say, "Oh, what a shame, how sad, how pitiful." Now, when you yourself want to disrobe, why don't you feel so sorry? He didn't answer. He just grinned sheepishly, as one can easily do. Don't just look at the Buddha like a simpleton. Don't cling to things, holding fast to them without letting go. Look at things as functions of the apparent and then send them on to transcendence. That's how you must be. There must be appearance, and that would be in the Thai language samut, kong samut, and there must be transcendence, vimut. So samuti and vimuti. So I say, go to the Buddha. Where is the Buddha? The Buddha is the Dhamma. All the teachings in this world can be contained in this one teaching, anicca. Think about it. I've searched for over 40 years as a monk, and this is all I could find. That and patient endurance. This is how to approach the Buddha's teaching, anicca. It's all uncertain. No matter how sure the mind wants to be, just tell it, not sure. Whenever the mind wants to grab onto something as a sure thing, just say, it's not sure, it's transient. Just ram it down with this. Using the Dhamma of the Buddha, it all comes down to this. It's not that it's merely a momentary phenomenon, whether standing, walking, sitting, or lying down, you see everything in that way. Whether liking arises or dislike arises, you see it all in the same way. This is getting close to the Buddha, close to the Dhamma. Sometimes I go to see old religious sites with ancient monastic buildings, designed by architects, built by craftsmen. In some places they'd be cracked. Maybe one of my friends would remark, "Oh, such a shame, isn't it? It's cracked." I'd answer, if that weren't the case, then there'd be no such thing as Buddha. There'd be no Dhamma. It's cracked like this because it's perfectly in line with the Buddha's teaching. Really, down inside, I was also sad to see those buildings cracked, but I'd throw off my sentimentality and try to say something which would be of use to my friends and to myself. Even though I also felt that it was a pity, still I tended towards the Dhamma. If it wasn't cracked like that, there wouldn't be any Buddha. I'd say it really heavy for the benefit of my friends. Perhaps they weren't listening, but still, I was listening. Not discarding anicca, the Buddha. This is what it means to say that the Buddha is still alive. To say that the Buddha has passed into Nibbana is not necessarily true. In a more profound sense, the Buddha is still alive. It's much like how we define the word bhikkhu. If we define it as, quote, one who asks, that is, one who lives in dependence on the generosity of others, the meaning is very broad. We can define it in this way, but to use this definition is not so good. We don't know when to stop asking. If we were to define this word in a more profound way, we would say, bhikkhu, one who sees the danger of samsara. Isn't this more profound? It doesn't go in the same direction as the previous definition. It runs much deeper. The practice of Dhamma is like this. If you don't fully understand it, it becomes something else again. When it's fully understood, then it becomes priceless. It becomes a source of peace. When we have sati, we are close to the Dhamma. If we have sati, we will see anicca, the transience of all things. We will see the Buddha and transcend the suffering of samsara. If not now, then sometime in the future. Revering the Buddha is the same. Revering the Buddha by merely reciting Pali phrases as a ceremony in the mornings and evenings is comparable to defining the word bhikkhu as one who asks. If we incline towards anicca, dukkha, and anatta, whenever the eye sees form, the ear hears sound, the nose smells an odor, the tongue tastes a flavor, the body experiences sensation, or the mind cognizes mental impressions, at all times, this is comparable to defining the word bhikkhu as one who sees the danger of samsara. It's so much more profound, cuts through so many things. If we understand this teaching, we will grow in wisdom and understanding. This is called patipada, the practice. Develop this attitude in the practice and you'll be on the right path. If you think and reflect in this way, even though you may be far from your teacher, you will still be close to him. If you live close to the teacher physically, but your mind has not yet met him, you'll spend your time either looking for his faults or adulating him. If he does something which suits you, you say he's good. And that's as far as your practice goes. You won't achieve anything by wasting your time looking at someone else. But if you understand this teaching, you can become a noble one in the present moment. That's why this year, which was 1979, 25-22, I've distanced myself from my disciples, both old and new, and not given so much teaching, so that you can all look into things for yourselves as much as possible. So during that year, he'd been offered the little monastery in the village of Ban Kaur as a branch. So he'd moved out of Wat Pah Pong and moved into the village monastery, and he was just there with 4 Westerners, I think Ajahn Titignano, Tan Gawesako, Samanera de Visero, and who's Ajahn Kemanando now, but he was an Anagarika then. There's the 4 Westerners with Luang Por Chah in the village monastery at Bangkok that year. So it was only like a mile or so from Wat Pah Pong, but you had to walk there to visit him. So that's what he means by saying, I've distanced myself from my disciples. That's why this year I've distanced myself from my disciples, both old and new, and not given much teaching, so that you can all look into things for yourselves as much as possible. For the newer monks, I've already laid down the schedule and rules of the monastery, such as, don't talk too much, don't transgress the existing standards, the path to realization, fruition, and nibbana. Anyone who transgresses these standards is not a real practitioner, not one who has a pure intention to practice. What can such a person ever hope to see? Even if he slept near me every day, he wouldn't see me. Even if he slept near the Buddha, he wouldn't see the Buddha if he didn't practice. So, knowing the Dhamma or seeing the Dhamma depends on practice. Have confidence. Purify your heart. If all the monks in this monastery put awareness into their respective minds, we wouldn't have to reprimand or praise anybody. We wouldn't have to be suspicious of or favor anybody. If anger or dislike arise, just leave them at the mind, but see them clearly. Keep on looking at those things. As long as there is still something there, it means we still have to dig and grind away, right there. Some say, I can't cut it, I can't do it. If we start saying things like this, there'll only be a bunch of thugs here, because nobody cuts their own defilements. You must try. If you can't yet cut it, dig in deeper. Dig at the defilements. Uproot them. Dig them out, even if they seem hard and fast. The Dhamma is not something to be reached by following your desires. Your mind may be one way, the truth another. You must watch up front and keep a lookout behind as well. That's why I say, it's all uncertain, it's all transient. This truth of uncertainty, this short and simple truth, is at the same time so profound and faultless that people tend to ignore it. They tend to see things differently. Don't cling to goodness. Don't cling to badness. These are attributes of the world. We are practicing to be free of the world. So bring these things to an end. The Buddha taught to lay them down, to give them up, because they only cause suffering. A1. So these are some teachings of our beloved, revered teacher, Luang Por Chah, to reflect on this day of his birth. And also, even though we're isolated, we're locked down here in Amaravati and have been for a long time, about 3 months now, it's also a way of establishing that connection with the other branches. There's 340, 350 different branch monasteries associated with Luang Por Chah, established in his lifetime and after his lifetime. So that this is also a way of reflecting on our family, this big family of disciples of Luang Por Chah in Thailand and around the whole planet, Australia, New Zealand, here in Britain, through other European countries, through America, Canada, South America, down in Brazil, and the whole global community reflecting on this day on Luang Por Chah's teachings and this amazing gift that we have received from his life. This one small man being born into a little village, 1918 in Ubon, was a very, very different world. They had no idea of running water or electricity, no idea of roads with tarmac on. The life there was very, very different 100 years ago. But here we are, living in the 21st century in the UK and all around the planet, able to talk into an electrical device and know that people around the planet are hearing these words and seeing my image. An amazing thing. It's a very different world after 100 years since Luang Por Chah was born as a little baby in Ubon. But how amazing and how wonderful that the fruits of his life can benefit us today, right now, in this very moment. So I offer my sincere gratitude and appreciation for Luang Por's teaching, and also dedicate the other events of today, the precept ceremonies this afternoon for Evgenia and Patrick, taking the 8 precepts today, and then the other celebrations and practice we'll have this evening in expressions of our gratitude to the teacher and our efforts to follow his way of practice and to realize the Dhamma in exactly the same way that he did. So without further ado, it's now time to have the meal offering. Otherwise, the other members of the Sangha will have to practice a lot of patience.